Welcome to those who have joined us, and I'm sure we'll continue to dribble in the next minute or so. But to maximise our time, I think we will get started and welcome those who join us as we go. So it's lovely to have you join us this afternoon. We have a fabulous panel and a fabulous conversation for the next hour or so. We have a Brisbane Sunshine Coast centric panel, so we're all watching the weather whilst having this wonderful conversation. I'm sure there are others on the line doing that as well. So before we go much further or any further, I'd like to really just start by acknowledging the traditional lands that we're all coming in from today, beaming in from. For me, it is beautiful Meanjin, which is looking a little squally today, the lands of the Turrbal and Yuggera people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. And extend that acknowledgement to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us as well on the call. I'd also like to acknowledge victims and survivors of child sexual abuse and particularly commit ourselves really collectively to being part of the change that victims and survivors really need to see and experience in both their protection but also the responses that they receive, and really honour their bravery in helping us find a better way forward for them. And again, extend that acknowledgement to any victims and survivors that might be with us on the call today. So with that, let's get into this wonderful conversation. My name is Alyssa Hall. I'm the Director of Practice Development and Engagement at the National Centre, and I'm really delighted to have these great speakers here with you. I'm going to do very quick introductions. All of their bios can be found on the website, and you'll probably know them anyway. But I will do some quick introductions to kick us off. But before we get there, just a little bit of housekeeping. So the session is going to be recorded for those who may not have heard the magic record voice at the beginning, and it'll be available about 2 weeks after this session on the National Centre website for anybody to access. Just to let people know, the chat function is actually disabled, but the Q&A is open, and we encourage people to post their questions in there, and we'll try to get to as many of those as part of the conversation as we can. And if there's a lot that we haven't been able to get to, we'll see if we can get to those in another way after the session. But just to let you know and encourage you to use that. If there are handouts and resources and things referenced throughout, we'll definitely try to put those in the chat so that you can access those fairly easily. And I think that's it. I think I have remembered and covered all of the housekeeping. So really keen to get into this session, which I think you all know is about child sexual abuse and the impacts within the family system. And when we talk about family system, we use that term very broadly. And we'll get to that a little bit today. But what we're lucky enough to do is to have a broad and rich panel that really brings academic and research wisdom, lived experience, depth and wisdom, and practitioner wisdom as well. And so bringing those different lenses together, we're really lucky to have the synthesis of what that tells us today. That's what wonderful story that we'll hear. So without further ado, I'm going to very quickly orient you to these speakers, and then we're going to get going in this great conversation. So I want to firstly introduce Tracy. Tracy's a passionate advocate dedicated to empowering child victims of sexual abuse and their families, and you're going to hear a wonderful, deep insights from Tracy today. Lauren French. Lauren is the Head of Education and Community Development with Body Safety Australia. So it's going to be fantastic to hear about Lauren's work and what that means for the way we work with families and communities. Nadine, we have the lovely Nadine McKillop. Nadine is Associate Professor in Criminology and Justice and co-leader of the Sexual Violence Research and Prevention Unit at the University of Sunshine Coast. So Nadine's done a lot of work in this space, and we'll share some of that, but also, just her wisdom more broadly. And lastly, but absolutely not leastly, which is a new word I've decided to make up today, is Corinda Camilleri. Corinda is team leader with Laurel Place, which is the sexual assault service in Queensland on the Sunshine Coast. And Corinda's going to use her many, many years of experience to talk to us about some of the insights that she can bring to this conversation about families. And I suppose just to kind of open us up really to this conversation around the reason that we're wanting to talk and centre this today is the National Centre hears constantly from workers and from victims and survivors about the need to really lean into the complexities and the challenges that families are faced with when they have an experience of child sexual abuse that occurs within their family unit and their family system, and how we do that, and how we really support practitioners also to be an ally and truly support families on the very long journey that awaits them ahead. So to kick us off, I guess we're going to start in that space around kind of understanding, I suppose, in some ways, and community understanding and our own understanding of where child sexual abuse occurs. So, I think certainly from a National Centre perspective, we recently did a community attitude study that really told us and reinforced that people have a pretty good awareness of child sexual abuse in terms of the prevalence. People have a pretty good sense that it happens in terribly high rates. Where people are less confident is recognizing where it happens and then how to respond. And we still very much at a community level have a view and a kind of a general stereotype that we're faced with around sexual abuse occurring within institutions and out there in other places. And obviously we're all aware of stranger danger and the prominence of that. So I suppose I want to start in that space, and I'm going to firstly turn the first question over to Tracy. Tracy, you've talked, publicly and previously about your lived experience and how the possibility of this occurring wasn't something that ever came into your mind. You never considered it. You never thought about it. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Tell us about how that felt, what that experience for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were your average Australian family. It was my second marriage, been married for 10 years. I had 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls, 3 kids to my first marriage, 1 to my second. I operated my own business. He worked in the Defence Force. And then in 2015, one of my children disclosed that they were sexually abused for 2 years by my husband, her stepfather. So totally caught me off guard. I was well aware of stranger danger. And, growing up, I always heard about stranger danger. My kids were always really, really protected in public places by myself and by my family. And it was just not something that came onto my radar prior to the disclosure. So, yeah, it totally threw me for 6. And I think what came out of it was just how prevalent it was within the home once I got right into the system and everything else. But yeah, the fact that it happened in my home under my roof by my husband for 2 years without me knowing, there was a lot to unpack in therapy with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Tracy, I'd love to ask you a follow-up, which is, do you think, is there anything you think, or what do you think that we can be doing to help families feel more aware, I guess, of the possibility, of the potential? And I guess, to your comment around even understanding the statistics, the prevalence, which is obviously we know statistically where it's occurring most commonly is with people that a child knows. What do you think we could have done or should do to help parents like yourself?
I think that's really tough.
Yeah.
That is a really tough one because you don't know what you don't know. And nobody wants to go to bed at night and think this person that I love laying next to me in bed, might wake up in the morning and do something horrible to our kids. That's not how we're programmed as humans. So, education-wise, I think there's still too much onus on stranger danger, but also way too much onus on a child saying no. We're putting it back on the kids. They're not actually in the wrong. And we've got to be looking more at the perpetrator's behaviour and the other thing that kids are learning is tell a trusted adult. If something happens, tell a trusted adult. And in the conversation that we're having today, that trusted adult might be the perpetrator. So I think, narcissism, this word is banded around a lot in community, but I think it's something that we really need to look further into. Because it was something I worked through in therapy actually for myself, to be able to come to some sort of terms around guilt and shame, that when somebody is presenting with all of the characteristics of narcissism, that's when we're, running into a problem. Not lots of people have one or two elements of narcissism. That's how our society works. But it's when we're looking at, ticking all the boxes, that's where we can have a problem. And that's really tough because you're not going to do that checkbox before you get married, So it's very, very difficult to think this is something that could be happening in my home. I think it is more around, in those circumstances, it is more around the response.
Yeah.
It's about responding the right way, because once again, what I learned once I was in the system is that kids are not believed and they're not supported. And so then we have, a multitude ripple effect in society of all the other problems that we have.
Yeah. Thank you, Tracy. So such incredible insight. And I think, to pick up a number, so many points you made there, but I think also just to your point around children needing to protect themselves, that relying on children to protect themselves, and that balance is obviously not right. It's adults' responsibility to protect children. I saw our fellow panelists nodding in many of the areas that you were talking to there. Nadine, I might just bring you in terms of your experience and your work in this space around, working with families and helping them to understand risks of harm and that space. And I saw you nodding to much of what Tracy was saying. I just want to open up the floor for you.
Yeah, thanks, Alyssa. Look, I was madly writing down things as you were talking, Tracy, that really resonated with me. And I think I just want to make sort of 3 points come to mind for me that really highlight why we see such protracted and frequent sort of offending occurring in the family unit. That makes it quite a unique setting compared to other settings, and it also makes it difficult, I think, in how we're challenged by helping families in the prior to offending occurring. I think the first thing is that the family unit is a private space, and so it is risky by design. It's not subject to the same levels of supervision, to surveillance, to external scrutiny that we've seen happen in other sort of places where we see child sexual abuse occur. And it actually makes it very conducive to sort of frequent opportunities to offend. That's the first thing. I think Tracy was talking a little bit about, the opportunities that happen just in the everyday routines of life when we've got a trusted person in our life, we trust them with those responsibilities, and they are in fact sometimes the best opportunities to be seized. The other thing is that Tracy was talking about, I think is really important, is we're not programmed to suspect the people that we love, that the threats to our home come from within. We are so much more prepared to think about threats outside the home and protecting our family from threats outside the home. And so that sort of not in my backyard mentality is something that means that identifying, disclosing, even acknowledging that this would happen in our homes becomes really more challenging. And I think the other thing is that the stakes are really, really high. The consequences are high when you have disclosures or when you have suspicion about this. There's significant consequences for everybody involved. And so I think in every regard, it weighs heavily on everybody, including the child who, is in that situation and is weighing up those consequences as part of what is happening to them. And I think that's why it makes this family unit, the family unit, very much difficult to guard, difficult to prevent, and complex to respond to. And I just want to just quickly make one point about that education of families, because I think this is a real challenge. I think this is a confronting topic. It is it evokes emotions in people who aren't directly impacted. And so knowing how to provide support, knowing where to go to navigate systems, people aren't ready to hear that in everyday life. It's icky and yucky. And so educating people, engaging those families, parents, children in that it's a challenging space. And I think we are seeing more and more sort of campaigns on TV, social media, other places trying to permeate the family unit in ways that perhaps we haven't been able to before. And I think we have to acknowledge that for practitioners, that we are trying, but often we're preaching to the converted when we are doing that, and otherwise we're just not reaching people at all.
It's such an interesting point about the challenges, and Lauren, one I want to bring you in, obviously here, given the focus of Body Safety Australia and your work around prevention. Can you tell us, I want to kind of throw to you about what you think about the challenges here that we face in terms of, supporting, enabling, educating families.
Of course, and Nadine, I think you're raising some really great points, particularly that idea of not in my backyard. I hear that all the time in the work that I do. So with Body Safety Australia, a huge part of our organisation as being primary prevention is trying to prevent child sexual abuse. And to do that, we take a whole of community approach. So we're working with children, with educators, and with parents and families, whole communities. And often the education work, the workshops, the sessions we do with parents and communities, this is where we hear those comments. This is where we hear yes, the statistics are awful. Yes, it's terrible, but it happens in this kind of suburb, or it happens with this kind of family. And there's a real inability for people, because this is one of the biggest fears that we're naming. And if we're going in to say that, hey, that thing you're terrified of happening, my job is actually to come in and tell you that it's quite likely to happen. That's terrifying to be in that situation. It's a really normal response for them to have, to go, I acknowledge that this is awful, but it happens over there. But then the other piece that I think is really important for us to do, because we also don't want everybody to be in a space where they can't have trusted people in their life, that they are living in a space of hypervigilance at all times, and everyone is a risk factor. And so I talk a lot with families about, I'm not teaching you that abuse is everywhere. I'm teaching you that it could be anywhere. I'm not saying everyone is a perpetrator. I am saying anyone could be. And if we have assumptions or bias or stereotypes, it's kind of like having blinders on. And so we're going to be very aware of, as Tracy was saying, stranger danger. We're all going to be very aware of that conversation, having those conversations with children. But if that's all I'm looking for, if that's the only risk I'm aware of, then I'm going to be ignoring any other sign, flag, concern, suspicion. Anything else is going to go into the basket of, oh, it couldn't possibly. And so it's just kind of helping, and a lot of the piece of work we do is helping families sit in the discomfort of going, okay, what does it mean to have trusted inner circles, to have family, to have support, but to always know I'm never going to disbelieve a young person, and I'm not going to sit in a place of it could never happen, because that's not actually helpful for the safety and protection and hopefully abuse prevention of children.
Incredible, Lauren. Thank you. It's so challenging and layered, isn't it, in terms of, that notion about kind of awareness, but not necessarily alarm, and, people still being able to nourish and develop strong and healthy and trusting relationships. It's a real balance. Lauren, can I just stay with you for a moment? And you've mentioned about family and community. Can you talk to us a little bit about, I know you do work also in the First Nations community space. Can you talk to us a little bit about the extra kind of layer that we need to be thinking about, or that lens?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm a Gurrudjara woman. So my mob is from sort of WA area, but I grew up in Larrakia country, up in Darwin in the NT. And so I live on Wurundjeri country now in Naarm in Melbourne. And I do a lot of work with First Nations community here in Victoria and rural regional spaces as well. And I think the first thing that we often come up against, particularly, I work within educational spaces, is the assumption of inherent risk to First Nations children and families. And what we're often trying to, again, help people understand is the difference between perpetrators targeting perceived vulnerability. And a lot of people can assume that First Nations children will have vulnerabilities. But this is also played into by the fact that we have to be aware of things like you know, intergenerational trauma, colonization, systemic impacts to communities and families, which might make it very difficult for families to have open, honest conversations about this very topic. Because if I'm a First Nations woman and I'm bringing a child to a service and I'm getting support, if my big fear is that you're going to view me as a threat, my family as a threat, my support network, even my culture as a threat to the child, then that will be a barrier for me getting support or even reaching out for support. And what that does is isolate me. It isolates First Nations families. And sometimes, you know, non-First Nations people can view that as, oh, they're sticking to themselves, there's a separation, they're not engaging in the work, they're not coming to the workshops. And we're not actually looking beyond that first barrier to go, well, why wouldn't be? You know, why wouldn't these people be coming in? Why would this be a tricky topic to handle? Practitioners across the board, myself included, but a lot of the time, you know, in different sectors, we can be very good at opening the doors for communities, parents, families to walk through. We're not always as good as putting a hand out and helping people through the door. So I might say, yeah, I've invited everyone into this workshop. I've said that it's going to be safe in a chat. You know, I've sent out the invitations. It's free. It's this, it's whatever. But we haven't actually addressed the barriers that are going to stop those families coming in. You know, for example, when I go into a service, I'm very clear to say who I am and who I am not. I'm very clear to say I'm not child protection. I'm not the police. I'm not, you know, I'm not a member of an institution that has systemically oppressed you. And here is my background, here's my knowledge, because then what I'm doing is signaling safety. Doesn't guarantee it, but I'm trying to signal it so that I can be more likely to get people in. Because, you know, I can have the best, you know, education, information, knowledge to give, but if no one's in the room with me, it's pointless. And the room needs to be safe for people to walk into.
Thanks, Lauren. That's so, I think just, you know, certainly making me think, and I'm sure others around, and links back a little bit, Nadine, to what you were saying about actually this kind of education space for families is really challenging, and we need a kind of a different approach, you know, to really reach in, you know, I think, and that's what I'm hearing, Lauren, from you. Thank you so much for those insights. I'm going to move us gently into thinking and talking a little bit about the impact of child sexual abuse and when it occurs within the family unit, and the impact both on the child, the impact on parents, the impact on siblings. And Corinda, I'm wondering if I can start with you, just in terms of your work in this space and working with many families. I guess, can you give us a bit of a sense about, you know, do you think people understand the complexities of what the impact means and looks like for a family in terms of the short term, the long term? Do you think that there's a good understanding about the layers and levels of that?
I don't actually. I think that that's very unique to each family and is extremely complex. So it's really dependent, I guess, too, on when a child discloses how that's managed and responded to. So if a child's supported through that process, you know, it's better for the child in the long run. But often families struggle with the whole concept of the extreme complexity of the disclosures of sexual abuse. And if you have individuals who have their own history, they're triggered, others are in, you know, complete denial. You've also got very diverse families, so it's, you know, working with the family systems. So it's very complex, and I think it's, you know, each case is very different. So not one style, you know, suits all families. You know, I guess you've got to go on the journey with the family to get a sense of what their needs are and how best to support, and then navigating all the different, you know, statutory bodies, because that's a huge fear. And I guess there's also the sense of blame, sense of shame, values, and, you know, their own value systems, belief systems, the fallouts, the loss of relationships. It's huge. It's huge.
And Tracy, you've lived this.
Yes.
You've lived the impact, you've lived the fallout, you've lived the ripple, and you're still living, you know, that. tell us in your words, I guess, when you think about the impact on your life, on your daughter's life, on your family's life, try to put it into words for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I continue to live at 10 years on. And you know, that's it. It's not something that you get over or you can have fixed. It's not that. It's the family unit has been changed forever by that event or events. And then, you know, it is extremely complex, as was just mentioned. And you have to, you know, forge a new way forward, especially as a mum with children, for yourself and for those kids. And there is that shame, blame, grief, loss. You've also got your finances, you've got housing, the mental well-being of not just yourself, but of all the children, navigating all those systems. But then what has happened affects each individual differently. And depending on, you know, their life stage at the time. So mine are all adult children now, but at the time they ranged from 8 to, oh, I don't 19, something like that, at the time of the disclosure. So different problems come out along the way with, you know, as they grow up and they learn more about what actually happened. And now that they're adults, they all know exactly what happened and what the outcome was. But it is so extremely complex. And if you can find a psychologist or some sort of therapy that you can have that you connect with as a mum, I'm speaking entirely as a mum here, to get you through that, that's what got me through. Because it's that one person that might have some understanding of what you're going through, even though they don't really understand, unless they've totally been through it themselves. If you can find that one good person that can back you, I still have that person 10 years on. And that has been the make or break for me. And now with my kids, you know, especially my boys who are like 21, 29, they both need, you know, different types of therapies and stuff now, once they're open to it, of course. But I know they need it. They just haven't realized it yet. And I know that it all stems back from who was their, you know, seen as their father figure, and they've lost that male role model. But they haven't just lost the male role model. The role model has been smashed to pieces of what they thought a man should be. And so it's really, really complex and challenging for them growing up, going, this is what happened in my home to my sister by this man that I adored. So it's extremely challenging. And I'm sorry, I don't have the answers for it.
But I think, you know, there isn't an answer, you know, and I think that's very clear when we're talking about that and we're hearing, you know, your incredible wisdom. I think, you know, one thing that you've said is, you know, how do we, making me think as practitioners, how do we be that person? How do we be that one person, I guess, that's going to be stable and make a difference in your journey and your life? Nadine, I saw you nodding. Again, would love to bring you into that in terms of your, you know, your thoughts around impact and working with.
Yeah, I just was just reflecting again on what Tracy was saying, and things like, you know, that we know that disclosures take longer in families. So that sort of protracted nature is means that, you know, you were mentioning, Tracy, at least 2 years where this was happening. So I just want to focus on you as a parent, if you don't mind. But you know, the fact that we tend to forget about that supportive partner in this process. And I think that often there is this recognition, the recognition of cues of inappropriate behavior, often quite similar to what we see as legitimate caregiving behaviors. So it's really hard when we are to distinguish between some of those things. If you look at where these incidents occur, it tends to be, you know, during bedtime, bath time, sort of natural caregiving duties where we actually want to encourage and nurture those opportunities for people to share and be with one another. And that makes it really, really difficult when we trust and love somebody to be able to actually see those cues as anything but that. And so going back to that that point you made, Tracy, about the fact that it was happening for a couple of years and it was completely unbeknown to you. And those emotional bonds and those connections, you know, sort of mask that for people. And I think this retrospective guilt that happens for supportive parents, where they're saying, why didn't I see this happening? It was right in front of me. Now, and often they say it because they can put all the pieces of the puzzle together and they go, I can see it now, but I couldn't see it then. What, you know, why didn't they come to me? Why wasn't there these opportunities? And I think that's for other family members, you know, that they're grappling with the reality, like your boys, you know, grappling with the reality that they may have also missed cues, that they may, you know, have questioned or hesitated on things. And that then brings this sort of retrospective guilt of missed opportunities to have intervened earlier and the impacts of that. And I don't think we can underestimate how that affects those people who are around the child who's been, you know, abused. And then I think the other thing is that you were talking, Tracy, about having to then just take on the responsibility of the family, the responsibility of everything that comes after. And I think just holding a person through, letting them know and giving them space to say it's okay for you to just grieve the loss, the pain, the reality of what you've lost as a family, what you've lost as your future, everything that was what your normal has been thrown up into a million pieces and shattered into a million pieces. And that we have to then turn that around, because the burden of responsibility is with the person who took those opportunities, seized those opportunities, and you know, used all of those sort of family dynamics to engage in this type of behavior. And I think that we need to you know, push that burden back to where it belongs, which is with the perpetrator. And then we have to then support someone through the next steps. And I think having to hold a family alongside your own grief and everything that comes after it needs to be really recognised and acknowledged.
Absolutely, because if I can just add to that, Nadine, the grief and loss as a parent, as a mum, as a wife, comes at the end of everything, not up front. You don't get to do that until a lot later. And it was through my psychology that I realized that all the opportunities where I could go back and piece things together, because it is about opportunistic behavior, and he was creating opportunities for me not to be in the house, to be out at a meeting, to be here, to be there. So you're never going to, you know, pick up on that until you retrospectively look at it.
Yep.
So, yeah.
And Corinda, just bringing you in here, I guess, about this kind of impact, particularly on you know, parents, mothers in particular, this kind of shame and overwhelming shame and blame and guilt. And I think, you know, Nadine, you just talked about it as retrospective guilt, and we hear this from families all of the time, and Tracy's articulating it beautifully. I guess, given you're working in this space day in, day out with families, how can we help? How can we better help mums like Tracy?
I feel it's really about that, going on the journey, you know, being there and being supportive, being genuine in your responses and how you support a family. So, because each individual will experience it very differently. And I guess it's also shifting the blame, you know, because often, you know, with a lot of mums, they hold themselves responsible. And as Tracy and Dean mentioned, you know, in retrospect, you can see, you know, how the grooming's happened, and the opportunities have been there. But at the time, you don't. And I think there's a lot of self-blame. So I think for me, it's really about supporting the families through that journey as best you can, and doing what you know you can do, and not what you know you can't do, you know, like, so being transparent in your processes, and providing as much education as you can and awareness as you go along.
Thanks, Corinda. And I know, Lauren, from previous conversations, you know, you've articulated that notion about, you know, for practitioners being open about what you're unable to control as well. So just want to kind of bring you into, you know, open your thoughts up as well.
Yeah, and what I keep, as everyone's been talking and discussing, because I think it is that, exactly that retrospective, I look back and I connect all the dots in that moment, but actually I was not able to connect all of those dots until I had that disclosure, that piece of information to frame it. I think a thing that we try to do well and probably don't do as well as we could do as practitioners in our education is talking about things like grooming, not just of children, but of families, of parents, of community. And I think that is a big piece that, if it is missed, really plays into that shame and guilt that parents and families, that people around those people that have been abused feel, because there isn't that acknowledgement. Hey, not only do perpetrators and offenders tend to groom children, they groom all of us. There is grooming at a whole community level. And so when we have that moment of going, why didn't I see it? Well, potentially because someone very intentionally was making sure you didn't see it. And I think it's having that moment to reflect and go, yeah, there was intention behind this. It wasn't that I was just missing something, because that's a very putting it on ourselves as we miss something, rather than actually things were intentionally hidden.
The purposeful nature.
Secrecy
I
is
just-
intentionally introduced. Yeah.
No, I was just sorry, it just froze for a second. I wasn't sure if you were finished, but I just want to add to that, because I think we've got to be aware that when we think about guardianship, so when we think about, and I'm going to use this word in a criminological sense, when we think about potential perpetrators and deterrence, when we're unfamiliar to somebody, we're more less predictable to them, right? In our families, our routines, the fact that people know us so well, they actually know when, like, they can use that as a predictable way of seizing opportunities. So they know, Nadine goes every Sunday to shop for, and when she shops for 2 hours. Like, those familiar routines. It's so much more predictable. It actually opens up, this lowers the risk perception. It lowers the effort to offend, and it reduces the risk. So I think that, when we think about how we protect spaces and places, actually it's an advantage to perpetrators that they know everybody in the family well enough and their routines to absolutely manipulate and seize opportunities.
Yeah, and exactly. It's not just on the children, it's on all of the adults around them. And the piece that we talked about there around control earlier, and it's something I talk to my team a lot about, but a lot about with educators and practitioners that often have a role to play when a disclosure happens, when education is happening. We across sector, we all have roles to play in this work. And I think what becomes really challenging for all of us is when we start to try and control our pieces that are not ours to hold. And so what I mean by that is, when I get a disclosure of abuse from a child, I have a very clear role and work to do with that. But my job is not the prosecutors. My job is not the court system. My job is not child protection, and my job is not, and even though I have a therapeutic background, my job is not to be a therapist to this one child or this family. And I think what we can easily do when these things happen, because they do hit us so hard, is that we try to control all of the things. And because we can't, because that's impossible, we really quickly burn out within the system. We really quickly disengage from the work, because we go, what's the point? What's this, and this isn't a time to talk necessarily all about systems, but I'm not going to pretend the justice system or child protection system or anything works amazingly. But also, if I'm too focused on all of that system work that is out of my control, I can't do my job well. And then my piece that is really important for a child disclosing, for a process of justice and healing, doesn't happen. And that's the big thing that I always come back to. There is a small amount that is in our control, but I have to focus on that. And if I'm too focused on everything else, I won't be able to do my piece. And then I will not be able to help children and young people. I won't be able to help families, because I will be too focused on what is outside. And if, as practitioners, if we're not really clear on setting up expectations of what's in our control and what's out, then I think we also then, if I'm thinking, Tracy, with what you've been speaking about, we can create unrealistic expectations on families as the practitioners for what families can expect when going through these processes. So we have to be also very clear on that, because I think sometimes people assume that it's a negative to be upfront about, this is what's in the control, this is the piece we're having and not. but being really clear on what is outside of expectation.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. That's really a important point around kind of the balance, from a worker, from a practitioner kind of approach. Many of you, all of you, have mentioned the word system. And I am keen to make sure that we do go there for a moment. Obviously, after disclosures, occur, families are plunged into navigating multiple systems, challenging systems, broken systems, systems that are hard to navigate. Tracy, I know that this is something that you have experienced and talked to. Can you tell us a bit about, your experience in that, some of the challenges, and I suppose how you navigated through that?
Yep, sure. I'm still going through system. So criminal case, so criminal law system for 3.5 years. In that time, I also went through family law, which was all intertwined with criminal as well. And I'm currently still 5 years on in civil claim against him. But the criminal, if I start with criminal case, the criminal system, one of the hardest things I think to come up against in that system for the family, if I just say for this point in time, the mum being the supportive mum and a child victim, is that you're actually a number in the system. You're not a person. You're actually classified as a witness, and the case is not actually about you. It's about what happened to you, and you're a witness to what happened to you, and that is it. And it's very, very, it's not a human system to navigate, if you like. So it was difficult. It feels like a lot of the time you are kept in the dark. I think I was the worst nightmare of the police prosecutors, the DPP, and the barristers, because I had 10 years in legal practice before this happened, and I'm an analytical person, and I questioned everything, and I threw legislation back at them and all the rest of it. So they probably haven't been up against that a lot, but I felt that without being that prepared, and I saw that as supporting my daughter to get the best outcome possible. When we did get to sentencing, he was found guilty. He actually ended up pleading guilty after 3.5 years in the system. And then sentencing, our detective said it was thanks to your doggedness through that you got that sentence, because he got 17 years. So I know I was their worst nightmare, but they have, the legal eagles have a lot to learn about treating people as humans. We were in the New South Wales criminal system, which at the time had a pilot program, which is now supposed to be being rolled out as a program that stays to help the child witnesses. And it was once we got flipped into that program, we had a judge that had that extra training in looking at the victim and the impacts to the victim, and actually looking at them as a person, that I saw a slight change in the system. But it was long and it was hard, and it really isn't for everybody. And I've volunteered in this space over the past 5 years, and I will tell people, if they want to disclose whatever, what they are in for, because it's not for everybody. And a conviction and a sentence is not always the best way for your healing journey. In amongst that, he was out on bail, and that meant that he could then control the family law narrative, for 18 months. So that was, a huge stress on me also, in amongst the criminal stuff. So, yeah, look, the legal I don't call it a justice system because there's no justice. It's a legal system and it has a long way to go. So I don't think there's anything practitioners can do apart from just trying to support the families and their clients the best way possible with a realistic lens. I've had a lot of mums reach out to me while I've been volunteering that are going through family law, that are they think that their partner that they're going through family law with has abused their child in some way, and they think that the system will protect them, but more times than not, the mother will have the children taken away for pushing that line through family law. And I will tell them up front, don't go that line. You've got to look. I'll sit down and tell them exactly how it is. Because once we had a conviction, I had his biological daughter who was around 10, and I went for custody. I went back to my lawyers because we'd only done property settlement. I went back and I said, he's now convicted, awaiting sentencing. I want full parental rights. And they said, why would you do that? And I said, why the hell wouldn't I? You know, to protect my daughter. He's going to be going to jail. And they said, he still has rights. If you go down that line, you may be doing visits to the jail. And I went, are you serious? So I didn't go there. And so that's where people have to become very, very realistic when they're working in the systems.
Thanks, Tracy. Incredible, like highlighting not only the one system, but the interplay of the systems, I think, you're talking about as well. Corinda, can I bring you in, I guess, in terms of that notion about supporting families when they're going through this system navigation? I think Tracy also highlighted this importance of actually people having realistic expectations and knowing what they're getting into and almost being able to make a choice. And that might not always be the choice that is best, kind of the best option. But Corinda, can I bring you in your experience in kind of helping families, mothers to navigate these challenges of the system?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Tracy's saying, that it is family law is a very a challenging and very difficult process. It limits in some ways the work that we're able to do too with families, particularly when a matter hasn't been substantiated. So there hasn't been enough evidence. But, from our perspective, there is evidence there. From the therapeutic perspective, working with your child and the family, but to be able to actually navigate family law can be quite challenging. So it's for me, it's always about being upfront and letting families know that the limitations that we have in relation to the therapeutic work we can do as you're navigating through this process. So we provide more of an educational approach rather than a trauma focused. And that's very deliberate so that it doesn't have an impact on the actual process. And I feel that what Tracy said too, that some families really believe in the system and believe that it's going to support them. And in what I see, it doesn't often. And it's really disappointing. I think through the criminal process, we have the pact workers, which are very separate to us. So they support the child through, so that's Protect All Children's Day. So they support the children through the court process and sit through that process with a child. So that's very separate to what we do. So we can support individuals right through leading up to that and then after. So that's a really good system, for us. But yeah, it can be very confusing and make it writing, statements. The whole process is very daunting.
Yeah, absolutely. Nadine, keen to bring you in, given that you're sitting often in a kind of this nexus of a criminology kind of headspace and lens. So just keen to bring you in if you have any thoughts, I suppose, around that kind of the system navigation. And I think also to kind of Lauren's point around, I think that you made really beautifully, Lauren, about it is such a challenging space. We know that it doesn't work well for victims and survivors and their families. And how do you kind of, as practitioners or as workers, how do you kind of not get completely caught up in changing that system, and we should all collectively try to influence the system. But, you know, where can you have the most impact, I suppose, in terms of working with families? And I just want to bring you in, Nadine, to that.
Yeah, look, I think everything that Tracy and Corinda have talked about, I totally agree with. And I think it just comes back to that, you know, that we talk more and more about trauma-informed practice, trauma-informed care, that's not how these systems are built. And I think, Tracy, you really spoke to that before about you're not a person in the system, you're a witness to an incident. And we haven't yet taken what we're seeing happening, I think, in other fields of practice into some of these, like the legal and justice systems, family systems. And I think there's so much work to be done there. I think we can't underestimate the responsibility not to re-victimize, re-traumatize families and children in these situations, and focusing those practices across the system, and being more holistic. You know, they're so separate from one another. You know, having to share your story, tell your story in so many different ways to so many different people, having to relive that constantly, and then there's this sort of siloed effect to the work that happens. It means that you're just always grappling and fighting for your rights and for your children's rights. And I think becoming more holistic and also thinking more about adopting some of those principles we're seeing happening in other sort of disciplines or support systems coming into those systems as well, to break down some of those barriers.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nadine. I'm very conscious of, and I knew would happen, that the time is running, but I'd like to just give us a little bit of time to talk about, a number of people have mentioned healing and the journey that is for a family, obviously for a child or young person, and for a family. So I guess I'm keen to talk a little bit about what does that look like? How can we help a family to heal? And I think, Tracy, you have emphasized a couple of times that it's an ongoing journey. You know, it doesn't kind of start and stop with a disclosure. It's a very ongoing, forever journey. Can you talk to us a little bit about what, if anything, is helping you on that healing journey?
Yeah, sure. It is ongoing, and I've done lots of different types of therapy over the 10 years. And I think it's different therapies suit different people at different times. And I think that's something that people just need to accept, and practitioners should accept. But early on in therapy, I had an experience where I think the best thing that happened there was that they were able to just hold space and listen to me, not try and fix me or not try and fix what was going on. It was while the criminal stuff was going on early in that piece. And remembering that as a practitioner, you may be the only person that your client that can speak to openly and honestly in the whole world. It might be you're the one and only. And I remember sitting in the office and I was talking and I was crying, and then I just closed my eyes and I said, I can't talk anymore. I just physically can't talk anymore. And she just said, that's okay, we'll just sit here. And I mean, we sat there for probably 4 or 5 minutes, which for a practitioner to sit in silence for that long probably seems like an eternity. But there was so much going on in my body and my feelings and everything else. I actually, you know, at the time just felt like I was going to collapse. And that's why I was like, I just can't do this right now. So it was like, that's okay, let's just sit. But that was just such an important thing for me, for somebody to hold that space in a safe space where they were actually listening, they were believing me, and I could sit and feel my way through it. So it's not trying to fix it. You know what I mean? Because sometimes nobody can fix this. It is, you need to be able to sit and feel and work through it, not push it all down, push it away, be super, super busy, you know, all that sort of stuff. So I've done lots and lots and lots of different therapies at different times for that reason. But yeah, I don't know what sort of practitioners you have on here, but I think in all spaces of practitioners, holding space and really, I mean, really listening.
Thanks, Tracy. The power of listening, but presence also, you know, sitting. Lauren, I'd be keen to just ask you around, we've talked before and we hear before, and I think in a previous conversation around, you know, First Nations practices and community and healing. What can we learn from First Nations communities around healing in this space?
Oh, we've got another like 6 hours, right? Just to go through all of that. Yeah, no. I understand what you're asking though. And for me, my big thing is like healing is an Indigenous concept to me, and it is a practice. It is a way of being. It's a way of moving through the world. Words like healed and fixed, and you know, you've gone through now over, to me seem very Western. They're very concepts of this idea, and it's very medicalized. Like, you know, you will go through a healing journey and you'll get done one day. It'll be finished, it'll be over, and then we'll move forward completely. And I think what is often lacked then, and the kind of the big piece of knowledge I always come back to from a cultural lens, is healings up. You do practices that are healing. You do ceremony that is healing. You have conversations that are healing. You sit in silence and hold each other with just your presence, as Tracy was talking about, and you have healing moments. They do not equal that you are healed, and there's as if it is a finite finish point. And I think in some Western contexts, we are terrified of that, of something that has fundamentally changed us, our world, our life, and that our whole goal should be to undo or rewind and kind of go backwards, as if that is ever possible. But because that is our fear, it means that a lot of the time, sometimes as practitioners, as Tracy was saying, there is a fix model. We're going to fix something because that is to us a success, without, for us as practitioners and you know, and in Western contexts, is sitting with, no, it is going to be uncomfortable. There will be discomfort. It will be long. There is not a timeline being placed on it, because that is an unrealistic expectation. But actually going and finding the different things that create healing at different times. And that looks different for different people. I'm a big believer in, you know, just finding the thing that works, and that's going to change at different points. And being open to the fact that something that maybe was working really well stops working really well. And that's not a failure of you or even the practitioner necessarily, but that we've reached a different point and we're going to need something else. And I think we need to get better as, you know, as a sector, as a society, at being open to that. Actually, yeah, in the same way that I think about in a disclosure, I have a piece to play. I might have a piece to play in someone's healing. But actually, there are lots of other people, places, experiences, opportunities that will also play a role in that. And it's not my job to dictate when or how or who that happens for that person.
Thanks so much, Lauren. What lovely deep insights. And I suppose for me, I'm sitting with this notion around, you know, just continuing to remind us that healing, it's not a linear journey. You know, it's a wiggly one, which people will come move in and out of. And I think it's a really great thing for a practitioner to remember that and keep that in their mind. I'm very conscious we're very much out of time. What I do want to do before we end is just give each of the panel members a chance to kind of say what would be your one takeaway in terms of advice to a practitioner about how they can understand and or help families when this occurs, if this occurs. Corinda, I'm going to go to you first.
For me, it's about being with the person and being with that family and trying to create a really safe space for the child so that they're, you know, able to work through or explore some of those feelings that they may have. But that's probably the key thing. You know, there's no, it's not something that's going to be like we were talking previously. Lauren said, you know, it's not going to be fixed or cured, or it's just going on the journey and taking your time to do that.
Right. Thanks, Corinda. Nadine, I'm going to go to you next.
Thanks, Alyssa. I think there's a couple of things. I think we've got to remember that practitioners have a role in prevention as well as response moving forward. And there are a number of things we've talked about in terms of character today, of people, and understanding why these things might have happened. But we've also got to understand it happens in settings, in places, in situations and circumstances that we can change, and we can create safer spaces, and we can also use that time to educate people on how to put some of those things into place, because there's that lack of safety and concern about safety and interactions of others moving forward is it's a real thing. So thinking about what can I do to prevent as well as respond, so that there is a safety package moving forward for those people. And the one thing I just want to say is the value of open discussion and communication. Brave conversations is the cheapest and one of the most effective prevention tools that we all have in our pockets. And I think it deters offenders, it makes resilient families. And I think we don't use that enough as a protective mechanism. People are scared to have these conversations, but the braver we are in having them, then there is that risk perception of getting away with these types of things, and the opportunities and things like that will change. So I just want to say we're not utilising that enough.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And a really important perspective around we can all do it. That the notion of the brave conversation. Tracy, I really want to end with you. I'd love to hear what would be your takeaway from today that you want to share with practitioners.
Oh, I think it's very much about that deep listening. Like listening to Lauren, I very much, through all the therapies that I've had, I've moved away from the Western medical models. That's what works for me. And so for me, it's like I was saying, holding that space and deep listening and working with the client's agenda, not with your agenda of tick boxes, of collecting data for audits, for this and that. It's about that deep listening and going on, meeting the client where they're at and doing what's right for them, what they need at that point in time.
Amazing. Can I just, I wish we could keep talking. This is such a wonderful conversation. I want to really thank our 4 wonderful panelists. It's been such a lovely synthesis and deep discussion that we can all learn from. Again, the support services are up here. Please do take care of yourselves as you do this work. We're also really interested to get your feedback. So there's a QR code, and we'd really love to hear about how we can continue to do sessions that will be meaningful to you. So please do give us some feedback. I apologise for a couple of minutes over. That was tardy on my end. Have a lovely afternoon. Thank you once again to our fabulous panel.